Hey guys, Killer here with another What Decks to be Playing This Week video. We've got new Zendikar set just coming out. That means rotation for standard, and that means completely new standard decks, along with some very, very interesting cards that happen to shape a lot of different decks in a lot of different formats. So today, rather than necessarily talking about what I think are the best decks, particularly in each format, because things have been shaken up a lot and things are really not solidified anymore, I think, in most formats, with some new cards added, making some new archetypes potentially tier 1, tier 0, tier 5, we don't quite know yet. I'm going to talk about some decks that I think are potentially interesting and some things that could potentially combat them depending on the format. So let me start off with one more thing. If you like these videos or like any of the videos I do, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitch and Twitter, which you'll see in the description below. And finally, I want to take this video a bit more lighthearted and not to say any deck is particularly the best deck to be playing this weekend, but rather decks that I think are interesting this week that you could be playing for each particular format, mostly focusing on new cards in new decks. So with that said, let us begin. We're going to start with standard. I actually haven't played any standard yet myself. I don't have any of the cards. I use a loan service, and the loan services don't have the cards I need quite yet. So we're going to look at decks that I've seen people stream or that I saw that looked promising. First one I'm going to look at is, what do you know? Uro Pile with a new card, Omnath. The landfall triggers are insane, especially when you have cards like Uro to get multiple landfall triggers and Escape to the Wilds and Genesis Ultimatum. So you're playing a lot of landfall cards, and you get to play these different modal cards. For this one, right now we only have the red-green dual land and the green-white dual land. But you're playing 4 colors, and somehow it's actually not that hard to do with Fabled Passage, these dual lands, Evolving Wilds, you've got Lotus Cobra, you have Uro, you have Cultivate, lots of different ways to get landfall triggers, lots of different ways to fix your mana, lots of different ways to ramp, and you have ways to use them in the form of Escape to the Wilds, Ugin, Genesis Ultimatum, and Omnath and Feldar Retreat, rewarding you for hitting your land drops every single turn. So now, let us move on to the next deck. But this is one of the most promising Aggro Shells, some form of Uro and Omnath as an Aggro Shell. Let us move on to a potential Aggro Shell. We've got 19 lands, although we have some more modal spells. We've got landfall creatures and 0-1, that's essentially going to be a 2-3 a lot of the time, or even bigger when you've got cards like Fabled Passage or Evolving Wilds. You've got Lotus Cobra to ramp up to things like Questing Beast on turn 3, as well as being a 2-1 attacker. And you've just kind of got you've got a couple different modal things that are like this, that is a land drop when you need it, or a 3-3 with landfall that can get very big when you need it. Just a lot of different landfall aggressive things, and we've got the usual suspects from last standard, Questing Beast, Ember Cleave, Bone Crusher Giant. At the very top of the top end, we've got some more lands that can enter untapped for 3 life, which usually won't matter unless you're playing the aggro mirrors, in which case, potentially, there's a lot of aggro, you have to change how you build the deck. But these that just deal some damage to things when you're flooding out, or is more land drops for your landfall creatures, as well as just, hitting your initial land drops. So it's going to be really interesting how these decks move forward with lots of different modal spells that can be, creature or spell / land, and how many lands you want to put in them, how many landfall cards, and so on and so forth. But this is a take on a potentially landfall aggro deck that looks pretty interesting to me and is something to try out moving forward. Now, I didn't actually see any streamers or anything say anything looked particularly interesting in Control. Lots of people trying different things out, but couldn't really find a way to beat Uro and such. This looked somewhat interesting. We have some counter spells for Uro / Omnath. People were saying it was really hard to go over the top of Omnath, even with lots of Elspeth Conquers Death. This looked somewhat interesting. Lots of the modal spells where it's like you can hit your land drops, or you could play these really, really big spells later in the game, and those look pretty interesting to me as a way to go over the top. And finally, the best way to go over the top in most standards where it is legal, Ugin the Spirit Dragon. So, it looked interesting to me to see these modal spells with the lands / big spells along with Ugin, along with some, early interaction and lots of counter spells, Confounding Conundrum to be able to fight decks like Uro that are trying to put multiple lands into play, or landfall decks that are trying to use Fabled Passage, Revolving Wilds that can really punish you for trying to hit your land drops and play multiple land drops a turn. And finally, Shadow the Sky and Elspeth Conquers Death as a way to clear the board and deal with big permanents. That's what I'm thinking about standard. There's lots of different ways to go. I can assume that possibly all these decks are not playable in the next week as people figure out some other things. But right now, in the first week, these decks look interesting and some of the things that I will be trying out. Pioneer. This is the one deck that I saw that was new. Not many people playing Pioneer. Pioneer's kind of been getting the dead format treatment as there's no big tournaments for it. There's no coverage for it. Most of the streamers aren't playing it. The leagues are pretty small. Most people just haven't really been into Pioneer of late. This deck looks somewhat interesting. It kind of looks like another combo deck, which Pioneer has been known for in the past. And the combo is the fact that you have 0 lands in your deck, except for the modal lands where you can play one side as a spell or one side as a land. So you play 0 lands in your deck, but you are actually playing 30 lands in your deck. You're playing 30 different land cards that are spells but also lands. And you use a card, Balustrade Spy, and when Balustrade Spy enters the battlefield, you reveal cards from your deck until you hit a land, put the land into your hand, and put the rest of the cards into the graveyard. Thing is, you're not actually playing any lands, so you mill your entire deck. You have cards like Silvermate Ghoul, Prized Amalgam, Narcomoeba, Creeping Chill, and all that stuff. And the way to make it so you don't mill out the next turn, you've got 2 Worldspine Worms that go back into your deck. Another copy of Balustrade Spy, Undercity Informer, essentially does the same thing, except for you sacrifice it, and you go to do the same thing. So that's the idea of the deck, is flip over your whole deck with Balustrade Spy or Undercity Informer, win the game on the next turn, essentially, with like 4 Prize Amalgams, 4 Silvermate Ghouls, and then you hit 4 Creeping Chills. So that's the idea behind the deck. It looked pretty interesting. It looked like it had a little bit of holes in it. Didn't look all that consistent, but it did look pretty fun. If you just want to stay with the regular stuff, you can always play Mono Black Aggro, Mono Green Planeswalkers, all that stuff. But if you want to play some new cards and something new, this looked pretty interesting to me. Now, let us move on to Modern. Where is this deck I was looking at? There's a couple new decks here. I saw what was termed Belcher. We've got Goblin Charbelcher here, and the combo is you have no lands in your deck. But, how do you cast your spells? Modal lands. Once again, we've got 4, 8, 12, 16, 19. We're playing 23 lands in our deck, and yet we're not actually playing any lands. So the idea behind this deck is you can play the card Recross the Paths. Recross the Paths allows you to reveal cards off the top of your deck until you hit a land card. You put that card onto the battlefield, and you rearrange the bottom of your deck with all the cards that you've revealed. The thing is, you reveal your whole deck because you don't have any lands in your deck. So you do that. You rearrange your deck to most likely put a Reforge the Soul on top of your deck, along with Goblin Charbelcher, an Ironcrag Feet, some Spirit Guides, or something or another, and kill with Goblin Charbelcher the next turn. So I think with that, it allows you to have a pretty good combo deck. These modal lands really enabling a lot of kind of garbage combo-y things in the older formats, which is somewhat interesting, if you're a all-in combo player, but pretty not interesting if you're a person like me who doesn't like playing against these new all-in combo decks that are kind of hard to attack in certain ways, and when you try to attack them, you're usually losing a lot of points against the established Tier 1 decks as well. So it's kind of hard to play against these decks, but they are pretty interesting, and if you want to do something new and something sweet, something flashy, this is something to do, and people are saying that it's that it's playing out pretty well and a lot better than they expected. So this is one deck to be looking out for. Another deck that I saw, McWinsauce, a very notable Magic Online grinder, has been playing Omnath, Locust, and Modern, paired it with Uro and Renin 6 and Fetch Lands and all these things. And he's been doing pretty well with it, 5-0'd a league or 2, I believe. Basically, it's like Bant Control, but you splash Renin 6 and Omnath just seems insane, especially with Fetch Lands. You just get a Fetch Land every single turn, gain 4 life, add 4 mana, just play out your hand pretty well. And if you ever hit a 3rd land drop with an Uro, or a Growth Spiral, or an Hour Promise, or you had an extra Fetch Land, slash the Field of Ruin on the battlefield, then you just get to kill their Planeswalkers most likely, and deal a good chunk of damage to the opponent. Omnath looks somewhat promising. If you can get to 4 mana, it'll basically stop aggro in its tracks because you can just play a fetch land on your turn, gain 4 life. You don't even need to gain the mana, and then the next turn you just fetch again, gain another 4 life. It's just gain 8 life almost immediately if you have a land drop to play with it, which I almost assuredly you won't just play it naked without a land drop. So it looks pretty promising. I have not played against it myself yet, but looks like a deck that could put in some work, and this looks like something that can add to the Aggro Shell. It's already pretty powerful in Modern. Now, what deck will I be playing in Modern this week? I expect a lot of people to do a lot of degenerate things, and I don't expect a lot of prowess. So what I'm going to be playing, if I can find the deck over here, is Humans. I think Humans just gets absolutely demolished by prowess decks, but I don't expect a lot of prowess this week because I expect a lot of people to play with these shiny new cards that are doing very well in a lot of different decks, and I think Meddling Mage against the Uro decks have a good chance of stopping the Uro, Omnath, Path to Exile, combination of things. People aren't really playing board wipes very much right now, so I think Humans has a chance to do pretty well in that regard, and with Lava Dart being out of the mix, like Unsettled Mariner, Phantasmal Image, these cards can start putting in some work. So that's where I'm going to be in Modern. I'm not sure if it's correct. It's more of a metagame call against people playing Belcher / other combo decks, and I hope that I can be rewarded in that way. Let's move on to Legacy. Another kind of degenerate deck that I saw was an Oops All Spells deck that added these pay 3 life, get an untapped land source. So it allows you to add some more permanent mana sources to your Oops All Spell deck, so you're not necessarily all in on play one Undercity Informer / Balustrade Spine. If it gets countered, the game's over. Sometimes you can rebuild a little bit more easily because you have these permanent mana sources. And the idea is, once again, Undercity Informer, Balustrade Spy, flip over your deck, win with a Thassa's Oracle, or win with some form of combo piece. And it seems like a bit of a cheesy deck, but it actually plays a lot better than you would think. I saw Onsley D play it on stream and do pretty well with the deck. And it is something interesting to play. But, you know, if you just want to stay with good old tried and true, Daze, Force of Will, Devil or Secrets, always a good way to go. Or you can play Snoko, you know, Force of Will, Force Negation, lots of removal spells for Delver and all that stuff. So, a couple different ways to go. If I were to play something a little bit more interesting, flashy, and once again, I would play Oops All Spells. But if I just wanted to stay with tried and true, Temur, Delver, Snoko, always good decisions in the format. Let us move on finally to Vintage. Vintage, kind of a lot of different decks going around recently. No new cards that I saw people playing in Vintage quite yet to success, but some decks to be playing and to looking out for. 4-color Underworld Breach, Paradoxical Outcome, some Bizarre Baghdad decks, and some Workshop decks. Not really much change in Vintage this week. I think most of what I said last week still stays true today. If you want to beat Bizarre Baghdad, play some blue combo deck. If you want to beat some blue combo deck, play some Xerox. If you want to beat Xerox, play some Bizarre, and Workshops kind of fits into there somewhere in the tier 2 range that just has some cheesy starts. Ooh, got a little cough there at the end. Hopefully that doesn't come through into the Pauper. Let me finish off with Pauper. I still think Tron is sitting in tier 0 status, and I think Affinity and Burn are going to be my decks of choice as I am more of an aggro player. Thank you guys for watching up until this far. Sorry about the cough and the throat clearing at the end. But if you like the video and you like what I do, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, follow me on Twitch and Twitter in the description below, and I will see you guys next week or on some other videos later today. Bye-bye.